Blog Talk Radio.
Yeah, you there? Yes, I'm here. On this show start. I guess start when it starts. Then?
We got 1 minute.
Alright, I can listen to Pop Marley all day.
Welcome, readers, listeners, and viewers from across America and around the world. I'm your host, Ben Garcia. This is FallenAngels.tv. It's a Wednesday evening broadcast, and it's the anniversary 7 years after the Hurricane Katrina, and to the day. And here we have another event where Isaac is moving through. Joined tonight by author and his father, also Leon, is joining us, Gavin Richard, who's written a book about Katrina and has done interviews and brought to light a lot of information about this, and he's got some further information that he's going to release on the show. So, Gavin, welcome, and thank you for joining us, and would you give a shout out to the listening audience.
Well, good evening, brother. Thank you for having me on this show. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here, though I wish it would be where I had some electricity at my house. But I'm fortunate enough, though, that I have my family, and we're all alive, doing fine, and we just send our prayers out to those in Plaquemines Parish that are not really protected by the levee system as adequately as what they say New Orleans is protected. And my father, I'm sure, will tell you very vividly about New Orleans protections with the levee system. I do want to say, now I don't have proof of, now I do want to say this. I was listening to WWL radio, and Governor Jindal and Billy Nungesser and Governor Jindal, have been talking on different television show, TV and radio in particular. Nungesser was on the Weather Channel, right? So Nungesser had said something about cutting the levee to relieve pressure in Plaquemines Parish, and Jindal said that might be a smart thing to do. It said they've done it before, so that doesn't prove that they are going to do anything to levee, and I certainly don't want to say that, but, you wonder.
Well, they have done it before, and it's been historically done maybe more than even what we know. So let's go ahead and allow your dad to come on and give a shout-out to the listening audience as well. Leon, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your willingness to come on the show tonight.
My pleasure, Zen. This is just ironic that on the history of the largest devastation in the history of the United States, we are here again faced with devastation of people losing their homes and lives, people where families are being separated, and it's just unfortunate that the powers that be, those in authority, did not call for major evacuations of Orleans Parish. They called for evacuations of Plaquemines Parish and certain parts of St. Charles Parish and the surrounding parishes, but never a mandatory evacuation from Orleans Parish, although I do think many people left Orleans because they don't trust the levees, nor the people that claim their levees are up to par. And really, you cannot speak about levee protection if you don't know the topography of the land in the areas surrounding the greater metropolitan New Orleans area, which is surrounded by water. But the Corps of Engineers has built a brilliant structure that stops water from coming up from the Gulf of Mexico into New Orleans, and it's a dam that literally crosses the intercoastal waterway, the Mr. Go. But that area is still unprotected because most of the water comes into Lake Pontchartrain, which is the largest body of water surrounding New Orleans is faced with. Most of the water comes to Lake Pontchartrain by way of the Wrigley's and the Chefmantur Pass. This is Gulf water that comes through Lake Bourne, but Lake Bourne is literally the Gulf of Mexico, and it comes into Lake Pontchartrain, causes the lake to rise, and now, as they've seen, this particular structure it's worked by stopping the water from coming into New Orleans, but it's funneled water into Lake Pontchartrain, and now with the wind switching direction as this hurricane passes us, that water is being funneled over to the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain and flooding Slidell and Mandeville.
And Tammany, yeah.
And what we have to realize is that this is something that we saw coming. Many of us asked the Corps of Engineers, when are you going to, what's going to stop my question to them was, what's going to stop the water from coming into Lake Pontchartrain if you block it off there at the Mr. Go, but you don't block it at the Chef Pass and the Wrigley's, which is about 7 miles wide. So, and all of that is relatively low-lying areas. So the bottom line is they built a structure that cost billions of dollars, and people have false hopes about this levee, this dam protecting New Orleans. And it's just ironic that on the the anniversary of Katrina, that here we go again, displaced from our homes, and in the recovery that's soon to come, or in weeks, months to come, the people who are really affected are not going to get any benefits or much benefits from this as many other people are. And unfortunately, at Braithwaite, we learned that one of our relatives is missing and assumed to be drowned. It's just a devastating event.
I'm sorry to hear that. I wanted to revisit and go back just a little bit to the first incidents of Katrina coming through, because there was a lot of weirdness associated to the events of that day, and I want to revisit some of that. Both of you were residents of the area, and you were both in the area at the time. Am I correct?
No, we weren't. Well, no, I'm sorry. We were residents of New Orleans, but we weren't in New Orleans when Katrina struck, if that's what you mean.
No, we weren't.
Okay, all right. Well, let me, just wanted to ask, as far as the details, because you are also well-versed and well-studied on this, Gavin, and I'm sure your father as well. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that, probably everybody from that area after the events of that day, really were consumed with the news and with keeping up with current events. So let's revisit, because what had happened, according to the timeline and how I saw it, Katrina had already passed to the east of New Orleans, and also the strongest part of the storm surge, which is up in the northeast quadrant of the of the hurricane, because of the way that it spins, that's the area that smashes into the shoreline. But once the hurricane actually passes and hits landfall, the strongest part of all that storm surge has already passed. Now, was that also your experiences, and is that the knowledge that you had gathered from looking into the events of that day?
Is this to me or to my father?
Well, I'll start with you, Gavin, and then we'll go to your father.
Yeah, for the most part, Zen, what you say is correct. Meteorologists have said it. That New Orleans was not hit by Katrina. It missed. It hit the Gulf. The worst part of the storm, any meteorologist will tell you, is the northeastern side. So that is correct. Granted, we are areas of Louisiana that are low-lying, like St. Bernard and St. Tammany. St. Tammany, where Slidell is much more closer to Mississippi. And in some instances, New Orleans East is closer because we only have the twin span separating that you can travel from New Orleans East to Slidell. So, yes, naturally there would be flooding and so forth, but the worst part actually hit Mississippi. Mississippi got more damage than New Orleans from this storm than it was with us, as you know, with the levee systems failing. And, of course, I've said this and I believe it wholeheartedly that some levees were blown. But yes, and in the northeast quadrant is the worst part of the storm. I can tell you also, I've spoken to, I don't know if you have my book, but Dick Gregory, he has assessed the same thing, that it missed and hit the Gulf. The newspapers have said right after Katrina, New Orleans dodged a bullet. People were dancing and drinking on Bourbon Street. Now, there was a special on the Weather Channel a couple years back saying that those news reports were inaccurate, saying that, well, they were wrong when they said New Orleans dodged a bullet and so forth, and it was the result of a miscommunication. Now, I don't know. Have you ever looked in? I don't know if you've ever looked into that. I've heard of it. I didn't give it much thought because, as you know, media will say anything, and the fact of the matter is the federal.
If the real truth always comes out during the event, and then they always have the cover-ups after the effect to kind of tie up loose ends. But I'm going to ask your father the same question as far as what he had heard as far as the storm passing, because in my mind I remember the media saying that same thing, that New Orleans has dodged a bullet, that the worst had already passed. Leon?
Yes. Katrina, if you look at the map of the Gulf of Mexico, Katrina came up from the south of Louisiana coastline. So it was heading due north towards the area, say, around Grand Isle, and then Jefferson Parish, and then New Orleans. But at the last moment, Katrina veered to the right, to the east or northeast, and ran across Plaquemines Parish. Now, if you look at the mechanics of a hurricane, it spins counterclockwise, and coming up from the south, you had east winds pouring water into Lake Bourne, Lake Pontchartrain, and so forth. Now, as the storm veered to the northeast, when it passed New Orleans, because the eastern part of the western part of the eye wall skirted eastern New Orleans, so that when the storm passed, now you had water being pushed from the western corner of the lake that had been built up back across to the south shore of Lake Pontchartrain. And that is what put water into into the 17th Street Canal, Industrial Canal. These are major inflows or outflows where water comes into Lake Pontchartrain through the Industrial Canal. But the 17th Street Canal, Orleans Avenue Canal, and there's one other canal. Those are outflowing canals, taking rainwater and pumping it out into the lake. Well, the lake was higher than the canals, so the lake was backing up into those canals, and the levees, because of their poor design by the Army Corps of Engineers, levees failed. But yes, New Orleans had dodged the bullet. New Orleans had gotten to a point where Katrina was leaving us. It was going away. And when Katrina reached New Orleans, the storm force winds were probably around a Category 1 hurricane, which is 75 or 74 miles an hour to, say, 93 to 94 miles an hour. So New Orleans had dodged the bullet. So what caused New Orleans to flood? It was the poor design of the levee walls by the Corps of Engineers. That, along with water levees that were possibly destroyed, to allow flooding into the city of New Orleans, the Lower Ninth Ward, and the lakefront area. Now, whether or not something was intentionally done, I don't know. I can't say for sure. One thing is for certain, there was a professor from LSU, Dr. Van Deerden, who stated that the levees failed because of the poor design by the Corps of Engineers. And this man has gone through some very, very unwarranted ridicule and embarrassment, and lost his job because he stood up for what he believed, and that is the levees failed as a result of the poor design by the Corps of Engineers. The biggest man-made disaster in the history of the United States was caused by one of the strongest factions of the government to protect the citizens of the United States. And these are the same people who build levees all across the waterways as well as the ocean areas of the United States to protect the citizens, and they let us down.
Well, let's talk about the levee systems, where they failed, the reports of those failures, and how it all unfolded. Because according to the news media, they would have us believe that all of these levee systems that failed on that day were earthen levees that once they were topped over by spillover from the increasingly rising levels of Lake Pontchartrain and the spillover, that spillover eventually weakened both sides of the dam and caused the barriers to then collapse. But were there not, in the failure of some of these levee structures, reinforced concrete levee systems that somehow had managed to have holes, gaping holes, blasted, or somehow they were blown open. The levees were breached in such a way that massive quantities of water started filling into the city. Gavin, let's begin with you.
Well, I can tell you personally, I remember watching documentaries on New Orleans or the possibility of a hurricane hitting New Orleans. And what I remember distinctly, and I remember it was a local newscaster, Warren Bell. He did an interview. He did the narration for the documentary. And they said any hurricane that came up the mouth of the Mississippi River directly towards New Orleans that was like a Category 3 or higher, there was going to be water even up to Bourbon Street. And they even had a simulation of what the water, the Bourbon Street sign, the famous Bourbon Street and Rue sign, with the water right underneath it. And Katrina, and we know this, Katrina missed New Orleans. I can tell you that the information that I've gathered, that the Army Corps of Engineers had money to reassure the levees. These weren't just earthen levees that they had. They were there was concrete and steel. And this was back in 2004. They were reinforcing it. Now, I talked to a gentleman, and this was in the 17th. They were reinforcing the 17th Street as well as the Industrial Canal. And my father can tell you there were times when we would pass over the 17th Street Canal. We did see these construction workers and so forth. Now, what they did and what they were doing, I don't know. I assume that was to fix up the levees. The research I've done in my books clearly states that there was money allocated for that, and some of that money was cut by the Bush administration to finance the Iraqi and Afghanistan wars.
Right.
And finally, there have been witnesses who have said that they heard explosions coming from the levees. One woman in particular, her name is Mama D. She lived around St. Augustine, famous St. Augustine High School, where me and my father graduated from. I have to do a shout out there. And she lived by London Avenue, and she could hear the explosions coming from the London Avenue Canal. And she said she knew they had blown them because the storm had passed. And when they heard the boom, she said it was about 2 booms. And she said the water came rolling down the street. Now, of course, I'm in law school as well, and eyewitness testimony usually, while it's very crucial, is also one of the most relevant, in a sense that, from what I've learned, is that they don't consider eyewitness testimony to be reliable because anybody can discern it. But there were other witnesses who said the same thing. And I can tell you, and you even had this in your documentary, a group of the black engineers wanted to view the levees, and they were told not to. They were not given permission to look at the levees. Everything that we know has come from the Army Corps of Engineers, who are the biggest culprits in this matter then, because they were negligent in fixing up the levees, and possibly they could have done something. Of course, they're going to deny it, just like the government has denied for the last almost 50 years that John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King weren't killed in a conspiracy. So who are you going to believe? And that's my take on it. And what I will share is some circumstantial evidence as far as not only the cover, but the plot that happened afterwards with the taking of the land. For them to react the way that they did, that could not have been something just as a result of an act of God or nature, that they reacted so swiftly in getting people out of New Orleans and lower-lying parishes trying to take their land and telling people, you can't come back for months. People can't come in New Orleans for months. The Katrina mold, the Katrina smell, the Katrina toxic. You can't come in. Yet we know personally from interviews and people I've spoken to, as well as information is gathered, there were people from different countries that came into New Orleans. Mounties came in from Canada to help. You had Donald Trump came in, I've heard, and actually looked at land right after Katrina. This was like a week. Yet they were telling people who were residents of New Orleans they couldn't come back for months. They said the same, and other people, my father can tell you, people they saw them with Georgia license plates. They were camped out. One of my friends who was there in Algiers, he saw people with Georgia and Mississippi and Michigan license plates, and all from over the country, staked out in Algiers in tents right after the storm. Yet a New Orleans resident like me couldn't go back for months. Something's wrong with that picture.
Well, I'm going to get your dad to comment, but I want to say this about the events of that day, too, because if you look into it, there were several occasions where FEMA had sabotage and the efforts and the assistance that many groups of people were trying to, provide directly to the city, and that they were turning help away. The firefighters that had come together to assist, they actually put them through a PR program and sent them to different places so that and so there was so many things. Even the Jefferson Parish, the guy that was head of Jefferson Parish said that
Aaron Broussard.
FEMA, right. He said that FEMA came in and actually cut the phone line to sabotage the communication.
Yes, that's something that I wrote in the book as well that I focused on. His whole testimony is there. If the viewers want to get a copy of Katrina, Eyes Have Not Seen, Ears Have Not Heard, they can. That was in there. And he also said that the sheriff's deputies were on a guard to make sure they didn't cut the phone lines. Bush, we know for a fact from the interview from the live news feed between the Max Mayfield, Mike Brown, and group agency from FEMA, and the President of the United States at the time, George Bush, getting debriefed on the dangers of this hurricane. And George Bush and the Bush administration lied. Let's just call it what it is. They lied and said they didn't know that hundreds of thousands of people would be flooded out of their homes, flooded in the Great Deluge, and 50,000 people would be in the Superdome screaming for help, and in a convention center. It's all lies.
One last thing, and then I'm going to get your dad to comment here. Well, Bush and Cheney, they were too busy being on vacation to even worry about the people of New Orleans, and Condoleezza Rice, well, she was too busy shopping, while people were dying in the streets of New Orleans where they couldn't even get food and water. I'm going to ask you about this. If you had heard about, because Wayne Matson reported how there was a Navy ship that was here, that was ported outside of New Orleans, and that this Navy ship was in fact used in sabotaging the communication efforts of the city, because they put out a radar jam that blocked all cell phone signals so that people couldn't communicate. Wanted to know if you had heard about that. And then let's get your dad to comment about the levee systems and what he has heard about the failures, because from my studies there were massive holes in reinforced concrete structures that just the force of a hurricane could not have done.
I know for a fact there was a Navy ship parked outside the port by the Mississippi River. And I remember distinctly that Nightline, Ted Koppel did an interview as to why this Navy ship, which had a hospital within it, as well as food and other supplies, diapers, why they were not ordered to assist the people in the convention center or the Superdome. As to the radars being jammed, I didn't know anything about that until you just mentioned it. Would it surprise me that it would? Probably not. but I don't have any. I would definitely like to look into it and see. But I do know one thing: there was a Navy ship parked out there, and why it wasn't ordered to help with the assistance is a mystery to this day.
Yeah, exactly. Leon?
Yeah. In regards to the levees, the levee structure, New Orleans has always had a problem with its levees. They've always had to be reinforced. Most of the levees were earthen levees, but we did have some concrete walls. Now, those walls were concrete. There was no apron along the inside or outside of the walls to handle any water that would fall over top the levee, and it would splash down to the ground and eat at the ground that was at the base. So there was no concrete down there to break up this splashing water. So yes, there was a possibility. There was a situation where the water would come over and erode the base of the levees. Now, the levee structure, there were I-beam structures, which were less stable than the new beams, which are T-frame structures. Those have more grab on the land, and they're supposed to be more sturdy and more suitable for the type of levee system that we have. It would have definitely been reinforced better. Now, we also know for a fact that when they repaired most of these levees, the work that was being done on these levees before Katrina was being done with a mixed match of materials, which included paper, twigs, grasses, and this is all was used as from the contractors or the subcontractors to cut their costs and allow them to make more of a profit. Now, the problem I have with that is, where were the inspectors of the Corps of Engineers when this was taking place? And why wasn't these subcontractors brought to task? Why weren't their checks withheld? And why weren't these engineer inspectors held accountable for the disaster that, by their negligence, they had some blame for this? So these are things that have been going on here in New Orleans, in this area for years. And it's not unsurprisingly that a disaster would occur when you have the mixture for disaster to formulate it, and you're just waiting for the event to happen. Now, as far as the land grab, yeah, there is a land grab in New Orleans, and it was, a matter of how can we get these black folks out of the city, out of New Orleans? We want New Orleans back. Katrina was the main reason for people leaving. The people in power didn't know what to do to get rid of us, so they took advantage of a disaster like Katrina to say, you can't come back. We're not going to build your house here. These people actually drew on a map and said, well, we're not going to allow you to build back in this area. We're going to make this area green space. We're going to make this area green space. You can't move over here. You can't come back to this neighborhood. Well, who in the hell gives you the right to say what I can and cannot do to my property? And in the Lower Ninth Ward, which was one of the hardest hit areas, 85 to 90% of the people owned their property, owned it outright. And yet when the government hired people to verify their title companies, the title companies could not, would tell the people, well, we can't find a clear title on your property. And this was generation property that was over 100 years old. So if you can't find my history of my title, then you can't tell me I can't come back, because you can't tell me I don't own this property. And the federal government, FEMA, paid out $200 million to 3 title companies to verify titles, and yet they were telling the people, well, you have to leave. You need to take the $30,000 the road home is offering and be done with it, because this is going to take many, many years, and it'll be tied up. You can't rebuild your home. So that's one way that they took land from people, and that they did to a lot of elderly people who were frightened, who did not have any children, and were on their own. They didn't know. no legal counsel, and this is what is going on, and it's going on now. Well, we have uncovered a lot of information regarding the monies that have been spent and allocated for the hardest hit areas of this storm, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But the fact of the matter is, the levees, the Corps of Engineers spent billions of dollars to build levees to protect over 300 miles of levees in New Orleans, and it failed. They failed us. They failed us, and they caused the loss of life and property.
I want to tell the listening audience, for those that are connected to the chat room that have access to what I just pasted, I posted a link to a movie that I had made about all of this, where I put together a lot of information, the historical reports and the different things. There was an actual congressional hearing oversight on what had happened in Katrina, and several people were called to testify. And the people, when they were called to testify under oath now, and they gave accounts of the levees being blown. And when you go down to street level and ask people on the street and what they experienced, just like with what Gavin had reported with Mama B, and he did interview her for his book. She was one of the participants of this particular congressional hearing. And
That's
so
right.
In this movie, When the Levees Break, Bombing of the Lower Ninth Ward, that I released back in 2006 or something, it's been a while. It has all that information in it, that congressional hearing. There's a bunch of video of news reports where people are reporting bombings and the things that they experience. So let's talk about some of those eyewitness accounts, Gavin, because I know you have also interviewed a lot of people, and I'm sure, Leon, that you've probably spoken to hundreds of people on this as well. So, Gavin,
yes.
let's go to you first, brother, and then we'll pick it up with your dad. Can you tell us some examples of what people reported and why it is that you feel there's something to it? There's something to it.
Well, aside from Mama D, I did interview a man who saw the barge pass through. He claimed to have saw the barge that was there that broke the levee in the lower Ninth Ward. Now, there were some people, I will be fair and say, that said they didn't believe the levees were blown that we've spoken to. There were some who said that the water came up after the storm had passed. They don't know what caused it. And there were some who outright, like Mama D, believed that the levees were blown up. Malik Rahim, he lived in Algiers at the time. He owned property in different areas. He was on the Crescent City Connection Bridge and wanted to actually cross there I'm sorry, let me start over. He wasn't on the Crescent City Connection Bridge. He was in Jefferson Parish trying to cross over there. And there's a misconception because a lot of people think the city of Gretna Police, which they did block off the Crescent City Connection and told people, I don't know if I can curse on Blog Talk Radio, but they said, get the F off the bridge. And Malik was told when he crossed trying to get into Jefferson Parish, they held machine guns at his head and told him to turn his black ass around. Mm-hmm. So this, and he has said he doesn't know if the levees were blown or not, but it wouldn't surprise him. What he did say, however, was that there was running water in that area, and yet the fire police. He told me this it was very interesting. He told me that the fire department didn't want to tell anybody that. And he said, why? He said, because if they did, that means people would actually leave. Now, I don't understand exactly why they would say that, but my thinking is that they knew something was up as far as they wanted to create an atmosphere of panic, of hardship, of destitute. And I don't know what the purpose is other than to bring in martial law. That's
right.
part of my theory on that. Who else have I spoken to? I spoke to Chantel Young and her mother. They lived in the projects, at St. Bernard Projects. They weren't close to Levees, but they have said that the sun was out, the storm had passed, and the water came and rolled up hours after the storm had passed. So, Mama D, as I said, she heard the explosions. And, I've talked to Minister Willie Muhammad, the head of the Nation of Islam in New Orleans, and he has said that he believed the levees were blown up. In fact, Minister Farrakhan reported that a guy who I don't even care for because he's a racist, his name is Hal Turner, he had said that there was reports of thermite and traces of thermite and debris on levee debris. Now, how true that is, I don't know. I don't believe I mentioned that in the book, but what I have mentioned reports from various people who have said something in the news. I've also spoken to a man named Terry Washington who lived in the Lower Ninth Ward, wasn't there, but he told me something very interesting. In 1965, it is believed by many of the people, and it's basically an open secret, that the levee was blown during Hurricane Betsy. But he said what was interesting was that the area where the levee broke recently during Katrina was almost the same exact area where it broke 40 years prior. So he said that was one of the reasons why he believed it was blown, and he suspected it. And it's very interesting. Nobody has asked the question, Zen, how is it, let's say the barge did cause the breach, and in fact the government has come out and said it wasn't the barge, which I have found hard to believe because that's a perfectly cut section if you ever saw the pictures. It's about a foot, it's like almost the size of a high school football field. This barge, why was it there in the beginning? Why was it there in the beginning? No one has asked. And 3 years later, in Gustav, and I distinctly remember this, on CNN, another barge was parked in that exact same area. Lightning doesn't strike in the same place then. Doesn't strike twice in the same place. So something was up with that. And I can tell you from reports afterwards, I've spoken to one gentleman while I was at work. I told him who I was and about my book. He lived in the Ninth Ward, not in the Lower Nine, but he lived on the western side. And I told him how I believed it was a land grab and they blew levees, and he said he heard the same thing too, and he believed it. And he said he actually spoke to a doctor who was a friend or somehow, and he had a map. And he told him he had a map of New Orleans, and it was dated back in 1998. And around 1998, this was where Hurricane George was coming. And he said everywhere east of the Industrial Canal and south, in particular New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward, all of that was green space. But everywhere north of that, from around the Superdome and so forth, they had all of the houses and developments there. So there has been a plan to take this land from New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward because it is prime real estate. Particular, I've said before that they wanted, and Dick Gregory, who's another man I've interviewed, and he said it was about oil being underneath the city of New Orleans. In fact, St. Bernard Parish reported in the Times-Picayune in 2006 that the city council was voting on an oil well. My father will tell you he's seen the oil well. It's not there anymore, but it was on Judge Perez in St. Bernard Parish. So this is valuable real estate that is happening, that is there. I also believe it had something to do with the possibly adding an airport in the east. So there's a multitude of things, and we will talk about it. We will talk to you about the information that we've gathered. That I've told you is enough to. It's even more than what I had in Katrina. It just verifies it. But another thing that makes and this is the new information. a man who, one of my sources who I won't name, he has a friend who works in the Army Corps of Engineers, and he stated that out in New Orleans East, we have 3 pumping stations. 2 are on Haynes Boulevard, and 1's Haynes and Yankee, if I'm correct. But they're all out in that general area. He reported, or told, well, not reported, but told him allegedly, supposedly, that the pumping stations were not manned and were turned off before the storm even happened.
Huh.
In the East. In fact, Ray Nagin, if I'm correct, from one of my sources, said that there was a critical pumping station in the night ward that was not operational or was shut off. So why were these pumping stations shut off? The pumps have to be manned 24/7, or
right.
they have to be on automatic. So it's very. So that just further that makes me wonder.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, you know, on 9/11 when we had those war game exercises going on too, and how all that was happening at the same time, and then Dick Cheney giving the Air Force a stand down order. All those kind of things make you wonder as well too. So yeah, any kind of weird thing like that, you have to. It's like I don't know if you heard, but like even with the recent shooting over there in Colorado and Aurora with the Batman shooting, there was a drill. There was a drill that happened the same day in the medical college that was. They were practicing in the sheriff's department and all that were on site, practicing this drill where a terrorist goes into a movie theater and shoots a bunch of people. How ironic, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the police, if I'm correct, didn't he say no? Didn't the school warn the police about him as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was also reportings of multiple shooters and how the person inside the movie theater received a call, walked to the emergency door and opened it for another person that came in, and then started to shoot a bunch of people. So there's a lot of weirdness behind that event and the things that happened during that time as well too. But let's go ahead and give your father a chance here, and then after he brings forth this testimony, I'm going to play a clip just to let people hear a little bit of some news broadcast that had occurred there in that day. Leon.
Okay, let's go back some 45 years back to Hurricane Betsy, and I've seen Betsy, Camille, Ike, Gustav, and now Isaac. Hurricane Betsy, the levees were blown. These were all earthen levees at that time. They were blown to protect NASA, Michoud, where the space shuttle boosters were built, the fuel containers. So we know that the pressure on the levees, these outfall canals, was very severe with Betsy, because Betsy, like Isaac, approached from the southeast of New Orleans. It didn't come up from the south. It came from the southeast. So it had a similar impact on the Lower Ninth Ward, St. Bernard, Plaquemines, New Orleans East. So Betsy, the levees were blown in Betsy to protect NASA. The levees during Katrina had a huge gap, some 350 feet or much longer, and where a barge was pushing through that particular gap. And Gavin mentioned that there was a barge that was parked in the industrial canal that was untethered. It was not tied down. Now, why would this barge suddenly appear? And now, today, in another part of the river, there was a barge and a ship that was untethered, was not tied down. Those barges wreak havoc when they're not moored, and when they can slam into an earthen levee or anything, any structure They will cause damage. And this was parked down and floating haphazardly towards the Levees Bridge, which is a tremendously large bridge in Louisiana. Now, I feel that unless you had someone with a massive pipe blowing water towards that earth, causing the erosion and putting tremendous pressure, I don't think the levees would have just broken on their own. I don't think so. I think the levees had to be tampered with in some way.
Absolutely.
Because there was no way that those levees would have just, I-beams, they're just not beams of metal just put in the ground and not connected as one. They interlock. And they're driven some 40, 50, 60 feet down in the ground. And they're reinforced by concrete. So something had to go awry for that to happen. And the levees didn't break just one spot. They broke in 3 different spots along those canals. Let's, for instance, take the 17th Street Canal. That levee broke about 2.5 city blocks from Lake Pontchartrain itself. And it separates New Orleans from Jefferson Parish. It broke on the Orleans Parish side. Why didn't it break on the Jefferson Parish side? Same levee, same water, same pressure, same construction. Or was it? No, it was not the same structure. The construction on the Jefferson Street side was much more sturdy, if you can believe that, than was on the Orleans Parish side. Same monies paid for by the same Corps of Engineers. Why were those levees not reinforced on the Orleans Parish side? Why? Now, as far as New Orleans East, I'm going to the Lower Ninth Ward. What we believe is, meaning myself and a group of other people who are very knowledgeable, very well educated, we believe that the Panama Canal, the finished construction of the Panama Canal, I think this year or early next year, is the reason why these particular people in power over in New Orleans want that land in the Lower Ninth Ward. They want it because they want to, number one, widen that canal to allow larger shipping units to come through the river and use that area for storage. Remember, on the western side of the Industrial Canal, it's nothing but storage from the Mississippi River to Lake Pontchartrain. That's a tremendously long area. That's about 5 or 6 miles long. And there's container storage already on the western side. Well, now they want container storage on the eastern side of the Industrial Canal. What better way to do that than to grab the land from the Lower Ninth Ward, which goes to the Intercoastal Waterway, grab that land and set up container storage all up and down the Lower Ninth Ward. Get the people out and seize the land. That's what it's all about. It's about taking the land, not giving fair price for the land, and putting the people out so that selfish people can have their will. And we're not just going to allow that. We're not going to allow that.
I'm going to get you both to comment on this. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and play this clip first. But when I come back, remind me, I want to ask you about the plans that they have for casinos and also for the expansion of offshore gas drilling and getting access to the gas reserves that were located there as well. It's a 6-minute clip, so after this we'll comment again.
Okay.
If persons haven't evacuated by now, they need to leave immediately. It is important that we advise all Jefferson Parish residents that based on the current forecast track, Jefferson Parish will lose public utilities such as water, sewerage, electrical, and fire services sometime during the night. People, if you think you are going to wake up in your bed on Tuesday morning and get back to any sense of normalcy, That is just not going to happen.
Fears realized. Tonight, entire towns have been wiped out around Gulfport, Mississippi. A local mayor says this is our tsunami.
No one says the federal government is doing a good job.
Baghdad, they airdrop water, food to people. Why can't they do that to their own people?
Underwater. Here in New Orleans tonight, after the giant storm came the rising waters. Over 80% of the city is flooded.
I have never, ever seen anything as badly bungled and poorly handled as this situation in New Orleans.
From New York to New Orleans, the Bush administration has not kept the American people safe.
And you know what? When I said to the president that he should fire Michael Brown, he said, why would I do that? I said, because of all that went wrong, with all that didn't go right last week. And he said, what didn't go right?
And Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job.
Oblivious, in denial, dangerous.
It was 5 days and much criticism before he stepped foot in the Gulf Coast.
A better leader would have flown straight to the disaster zone and announced the immediate mobilization of every available resource.
Initial response was uncoordinated, weak.
Satisfied with the response?
Why did the response take so long? That is the question.
Especially when they had a 3-day warning at the level it was going to hit.
People are being forced to live like animals.
And they want answers. They want accountability.
People are dying at the convention center, and there's no one to come get them.
No, my mother suffers from congestive heart failure. Come on, man. These juices and stuff. Tell these old people here, these old people been on here since Monday. Damn son, we need to give these old people peanut butter down in the glass of water. They have fun, nothing. Make sure y'all show that. Show all these old people these babies. Look at that baby there.
For the last 4 days, I've been seeing dead bodies in the streets here in Mississippi, and to listen to politicians thanking each other and complimenting each other, you know, I got to tell you, there are a lot of people here who are very upset and very angry and very frustrated, and when they hear politicians thanking one another, it just, it kind of cuts them the wrong way right now, because literally there was a body on the streets of this town yesterday being eaten by rats.
2 days ago, I was on that same bridge at exit 235 saying there were thousands of people there then who didn't know where to go. They went to the Superdome. They were told no. The federal government finally stepped up and said, no, don't go to the Superdome, but they weren't told where to go. So they sit there. It may be because they were worried about chaos in other places if too many people were gathered. There's just no answer to that question. It's one of the first stories I've ever covered where questions as simple as, why do the people on the easily accessible bridge not get food and water, and don't even get instructions of where to go to get food and water and medical attention? It's the first time I've ever not known the answer to that, and I'm not sure there is an answer.
Yeah.
They won't let them walk out of there because I'm standing right above that convention center. And what they've done is they've locked them in there. The government said, you go here and you'll get help, or you go in that Superdome and you'll get help, and they didn't get help. They got locked in there, and they watched people being killed around them, and they watched people starving, and they watched elderly people not get any medicine. And now they know it's happening because we've been telling them repeatedly over and over every day. And you know what they're doing now? And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm telling you what's happening. They have set up a checkpoint at the bottom of this bridge. This is the bridge that takes you from New Orleans over into Gretna, from Orleans Parish into Jefferson's Parish. It's the only way out. It's the connection to the rest of the world. And they've set up a checkpoint, and anyone who walks up out of that city now is turned around. You are not allowed to go to Gretna, Louisiana from New Orleans, Louisiana. Over there, there's hope. Over there, there's electricity. Over there, there's food and water. But you cannot go from there to there. I think the government will not allow you to do it. It's a fact.
I want to get some perspective here, because earlier today the images
were... That is perspective.
Hang on a second.
That is all the perspective you need.
Let's talk about the purposeful neglect of the New Orleans citizens. There was no water, no instructions, no help, no aid provided to anybody anywhere. The government allowed the scene and the scenario, the circumstances to get out of hand. They forced people to have to steal food and water, gin themselves. People, especially a lot of elderly and a lot of young people, died simply from not being able to get access to food and water. They expired on the streets of America because they were neglected to death by their government. And the only reason the government did this is because they wanted to implement martial law. They wanted to do a whole trial and test run for gun confiscation, and they wanted to eradicate and strip Posse Comitatus from the American Constitution. Let's go to Gavin, and then we'll pick up with your dad. Gavin?
Well, first off, Zen, when I listen to those clips, man, it makes me real full because, I watch TV. I was fortunate enough to get out, and we evacuated to Dallas, and we came back to Baton Rouge, and even though in Baton Rouge, while we stayed at this complete stranger's house who didn't know us, before, the energy went out for like a week, we watched this, and so we would even hear it on the radio, and this would just make me boiling in anger and biting my lip, because there's no way in the most powerful city, the most powerful country in the world that can send shuttles to Mars, land rovers, and outside this galaxy, that they can start a war and end a war in less than 2 weeks, that they can drop off supplies to people of another country as they did in a tsunami, yet not one bottle of water, not one bag of food, no diapers, no medicine could be given to the people of New Orleans, those American citizens that were dying. It's frustrating mainly because also as American people, we fall for this shit. We keep falling for this. And people don't do anything about it now. They look at it, and they say, oh, it was a pity what happened, and, there's some debate for a few months that goes on, and then after that we go our natural lives, back to our normal lives. The fact of the matter is, for the last 7 years, my family and I, while we have struggled to move on, we know our life will forever be changed. And for other families who did lose relatives and loved ones, their lives will never be the same. And I don't think anyone who was down in New Orleans' lives will ever be the same. But we as a country have drastically changed. And we need to start waking up, because the people who we think that we put in office are not looking out for our best interest. They're only looking out for themselves. And what happened in Hurricane Katrina and Rita and the aftermath clearly demonstrated that. And the fact of the information that we know now, why is it George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney not thrown before a court of law for criminal negligence? Why is the Army Corps of Engineers, we can't sue the Army Corps of Engineers, even though they were found liable for the flooding because they've proven that they didn't do an adequate job. Yet the judge said we can't recover the money from it. That we'll never see it due to the 10th Amendment with regards to suing the state. This is some of the relevant information that we have been discussing. I don't have access to the papers that I have right now, but I can tell you offhand we have new information with regard, and we'll talk about that soon. I'm sure in your show about the new information that I've said I can write even another book on because it's overwhelming.
Well, you're welcome to bring it up anytime, Gavin. We've got 25 minutes remaining in the show, so whenever you would like, you feel free to listen.
Great, thank you. Well, my father is more expert, has a lot of information on that. He can probably tell it better than me on that part. I'll cut in and say it, and I'll let him say what he has to say about the negligence. But I want to say to your listeners that everybody should watch that video. I tried to watch your video last night, me and my father told me to turn it off because he couldn't stand it. Because this is our home.
Right.
And this is our home for over 20 years. My father lived there and mother lived there all their lives. My brother, we played there. And what was most sickening was that people were saying, why rebuild New Orleans? It's not flood again. Well, hell, why would you rebuild Los Angeles after the earthquake? Or San Francisco? San Francisco and Los Angeles, they've been saying it's going to fall into the Pacific. Do you think Hollywood would take kindly to the Urban Land Institute saying not to rebuild those areas or let California flow into the Pacific?
Right.
Do you think they would stand for that? Do you think they would say not to rebuild New York after the terrorist attacks, even though we know what really happened when we look at Tower 7? But still, you think the people of New York would take that? There's no way. But because it's New Orleans, because it's mostly black, 67. Just remember this: we had a black population over 70%. But we had did have a high concentration of the poor. The fact of the matter is that the government has said they do not care about poor niggers and poor white folks. They do not want blacks to rebuild in New Orleans. They did not want to reopen New Orleans because it's mostly black, and they want all the land for themselves. And they have done a great job so far of misleading the people with these false notions of hope and prestige that they say, we're bringing New Orleans back. BS. They can't even fix a pothole in the ground. It's BS. And I've been back to New Orleans, East and the Lower Ninth Ward. It has been a residential effort that those part of those areas have come back. The city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, and damn sure the federal government has done nothing. They haven't the city hasn't even rebuilt the hospitals there. The hospitals that they're reporting, this is the new information I'm chiming you in on. They gave Methodist Hospital, which is in New Orleans East, I've talked to you about it before, has not been reopened. Daughters of Charity have bought that piece of land, and they plan to make it an 80-bed emergency service. Now, what that is, now you think about this for a second. New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward had a combination of a population combined of nearly the population of Lake Charles, over almost 80,000 people. Do you think 80 beds is enough to help the sick and the ill or emergency services? What they plan to do is transport those people to the new hospital that they're building in Mid-City, oh, by the way, which they've torn historic homes down to build. We also have, and we also know we had Lakeland Hospital that was off of Bullard and I-10, off the I-10 service road. That hospital has yet to be reopened, and in fact, that hospital is going to be torn down for a Walmart. Now, we have fought, and we continue to fight to have retail. Having a Walmart, yeah, that's fine. We had Walmart and Sam's back on the service road, but I can tell you, before Katrina even happened, when we had those two stores there, New Orleans East was still largely forgotten. We had only one large clothing store, and that was Dillard's, out of a beautiful mall, the Plaza Mall, which was once one of the biggest malls in the state of Louisiana. Now it's a Lowe's. So instead of thinking clothes, I got to think construction now. Our people are forced to shop in Jefferson Parish and St. Tammany, who are taking our tax dollars, rebuilding stuff on their own, and taking the jobs in Orleans Parish, some of them, and they're taking our money, but yet some of those people don't want blacks around them, but they will take your money. They'll take your money. So the rebuilding of a hospital, for example, they're not going to rebuild Methodist. They couldn't even put up, it's a $110 million project. They only promised in 2010, they were only able to get $1.2 million or less than that. Now they said they got $13 million through Cedric Richmond, who's the representative. But they're not going to make a full-service emergency hospital. It's been 7 years. That hospital only had one floor that was flooded. Never did they rebuild it. Never did they. Never did they open it. And that's the most telling statement of what the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana and the federal government care about people that live in New Orleans and low-lying parishes in that general area. I'll pass it to my father now and let him tell you what he thinks.
Let me make one comment here just real quick. And I do want to remind everybody that we are a family show too, I totally appreciate your passion, Gavin, and I can understand the frustration and the anger and all of that. As far as I can't sympathize because I don't have family there, but I can't imagine and I can't understand. But if I did, I can't even imagine the effects, the devastation. And I remember that even during the time that hurricane was happening, they were splitting families up. They were sending people, some children, you wouldn't even allow them to get on their buses with their parents. And so there was all kind of chaos that was created purposely. And I also want to say this, and we'll go to your dad. The powers that be that are in control right now, in control of the country, that are put us $16 trillion in debt, they hate us all. They hate us all. They want us all to suffer. This country has been now promoted and controlled for the ruling elite. Everything is geared to take care of the wealthy elite and to make things better for them. They pay the same taxes as all the rest of those that are barely scraping by. They get tax havens, they get foundations, they can write off this and that. Romney's got his tax shelters, and I'm sure Obama's got his too. So it's like two sides of the same coin, and right now America is being brought down to its knees. They're making us into a third world country. Leon?
Yeah. Before you go there, I just want to apologize for the language, because you said it was a family show. I didn't want to offend anybody, but that's just how I feel. So,
no, I understand, brother. Yeah, I understand, and I'm sure the listening audience understands as well. So, Leon?
Well, I just want to say this, that Gavin was right in telling you that. I just couldn't look at the clip last night. I just have very strong emotions about my people going through that, and it just kind of with Katrina here and now Isaac. Sorry, I just couldn't take it at that time. But I just wanted to mention a few things. Number one, when Katrina hit New Orleans and people flooded, the city was flooded, and 80% of the city was flooded, and evacuations took place. President George Bush's mother even said, "These people are refugees." That right there should have every black leader should have been up in arms when she made reference to the fact that we were better off than what we were before Katrina. Make no mistake about it. New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward had independent property owners, had homeowners, had well-educated people. I know a man whose mother drowned, and this lady was a retired Air Force veteran and had raised not only her 5 kids, but also raised 4 of her nieces and nephews, and every single one of them graduated from college and had master's degrees and were virtuosos. They were experts in a particular instrument: piano, violin, clarinet, drums, trombone, trumpet. They were experts. They were virtuosos. So we were not, and are not, a disadvantaged people because of a laissez-faire or lackadaisical attitude that is the misperception of this old white lady and those people who are white and racist. The problem, the reason why we are being mistreated is undeniable. It is racism, pure and simple. Racism divides brother from sister, sister from mother, divides child from parent, parent from sibling. And its sole purpose is to divide and conquer, to take the weak and the misinformed and dwell on that and propagate that sense of in you that this person is trying to take what you have. And that could be, and I know the circles that I dwell in, that could be the furthest thing from my mind. Because I want you to succeed so that you can make a positive contribution to our neighborhood and lift up others so that others may attain a quality of life. Now, I'm not talking about a quality of life where everybody has 4 cars or they live in a 3,800 square foot home. I'm talking about the ability, the right to pursue liberty and freedom, the right to walk down the street and not to be stopped by a police officer if you have a close-cut haircut or if you have dreadlocks. I'm talking about the right to go to a school of your choice, the right to have the opportunity not to succeed, but just the opportunity to fail. And let me explain that to you. If I'm trying to better my community, I must at least afford you an opportunity to say, well, I tried. And I didn't have any stumbling blocks in my way. No one put stumbling blocks in my way. If I had stumbling blocks placed in front of me, I had people to help me move it and say, here, brother, let me push that out your way so you can get to the next level. Racism, the haves do not want the have-nots to become haves because it is their way of holding you down. And I feel that the more you try to push me down, the more I'm going to stand up and look you in the eye and say, not on my watch. You're not going to do this to me. Racism is the cause of this evil that has economic injustice festering to promote the will of the racist person. The racist person oppresses someone because they change their destiny. They want to be in control of them. I could never be a racist because I'm black. I could never be a racist because I know what racism is. And now the people in New Orleans have been under tremendous pressure to do well, but we are facing economic forces that are hindering us and telling us, I'm going to tear you down at every point. I'm not going to let you at least have the opportunity to fail. And this is the main problem here, economic racism.
Well, I'm going to make this comment. I don't know if either of you guys have read the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and they say it's a Jewish text, but it's not. The people that are the elites that are fomenting the division that create the minorities just so that the opposition can be controlled. They, at the top of this Illuminati pyramid, they are people of all genders, all races, of all shapes and forms, and they're really oppressing all of us. But they do it exactly how you said it. They create the minorities, they create the opposition, they create the control structure, and they create the ferocity that minorities, feel against each other. Now we have the illegal immigrants also being fomented as this political group, and they're in such, they're are an unspoken group, and they are going to be utilized also to create and foment unrest here in this country, and all that's being played out purposely. I'm going to give both of you a chance to comment, final comment. We've got 9 minutes, so let me give each of you 3 minutes, and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay, well, we want to share new information. We said we would. I did give you a little bit, but we have a plan in place that we have talked about with New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward, where we actually want to form our own city. We want to separate, if you will call it, from the city of New Orleans and have our own form of government. You take your French Quarter and you do what you want with it, but you're not going to continue to take our tax dollars and not deprive us of our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, as well as property. Then what I will tell you is that HUD, Housing Urban Development, was given $49 billion from FEMA. This money was supposed to be allocated to the hardest hit areas of New Orleans, which was underwater. And this included the Lower Ninth Ward. This also included New Orleans East. This also included Pontchartrain Park, as well as, what's the other place, Dad? Desire in Florida? Yes. None of this money went to these hardest hit areas. They have been holding it. And I can't say much, but I do believe there needs to be an independent, thorough investigation into this criminal matter. In fact, it has been documented that money was supposed to go to the hardest hit areas, and it actually went to the Superdome. This is documented. There's also a count of monies going to different parishes called the Go Zone Project. If you have a chance to read the Baton Rouge Advocates edition back on Super Bowl Sunday this past year, they even talk about it. So none of the money has gone to the hardest hit areas. They've been spread out elsewhere. And this also includes money that was supposed to go to Suno. They've been sitting on it. So that's some of the new things that I wanted to share with you. And more will be still to come. Right. I'll leave it to my dad. I will say thank you for allowing me on your show.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Gavin.
Yeah.
Leon.
Zen, I just want to tell you that monies that were supposed to come to the hardest hit areas have been diverted. The monies were put in the general fund with the state and distributed to the city under the guise of, well, here you go. Here, you got $50 million. You do what you want with it. And the money was earmarked by the federal government. Hey, this needs to go to New Orleans East. The city people took that money and said, well, we're going to take this money and put it uptown. Case in point, a house in the Audubon district of Audubon area of New Orleans in the St. Charles Magazine, houses in those areas were pre-Katrina, they were valued at $225,000. After the storm, they will receive monies for infrastructure and for for flood-proofing
refurbishment.
and refurbishment, and those houses are valued at $600,000 now. Every year, the city of New Orleans collects $150 million from the taxpayers on property tax from New Orleans East and the Lower Ninth Ward. Every year, the city of New Orleans collects $44 million on sales taxes from the Lower Ninth Ward and New Orleans East. Over $200 million every year, and not 1% goes back into New Orleans East or the Lower Ninth Ward. It's time, people, that you look at this and say, wait a minute, we need to separate from the city. The heck with the French Quarter. You can have it, and we're going to form our own city and make Eastern New Orleans the jewel that it is, polish it up, and create the city of East New Orleans or the city of Lake Pontchartrain. Because it's time now that we are not going to be bamboozled, and we want ours just like you have yours.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming on to the show and your willingness to testify and to share the information that you do bring forward. And Gavin, real quick, can you make mention of where people can get your book again real quick?
Yes, Katrina, eyes have not seen, ears have not heard. They're available online mainly through my publishing company, through the self-publishing company, authorhouse.com, also Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, all different .coms. But the book is also available on Kindle from Amazon, so you can go get it from there. And if you're in... Go ahead.
That book then has been made required reading by the political science department for incoming freshmen at Southern University at Baton Rouge.
At social science, too. And I'm up at the Law Center at Southern. I'm a 2L now. I actually had to. I was actually requested to do a lecture on my book and share the information that I'm sharing with you tonight to the students, and some of whom were breaking down crying when they heard it. They were upset at what happened with New Orleans. There's actually plans for another book. I'll tell your listening audience right now with the information that I have, eventually I would like to do another book. When, I don't know, but it probably would have to be after the bar exam and so forth. So.
Well, congratulations on all of that, Gavin, and good luck on your bar exam, brother. We appreciate your efforts. And just to remind the listening audience, I did make a documentary about the bombing of the Lower Ninth Ward. You can find it on YouTube. It's freely available there, and a lot of people have cited on the videos and told me personally that when they found out the information and the truth of it, it broke their heart. And it should. It absolutely should, because it's that important of a matter and that important of a subject. And with that, God bless all.
One quick thing. 1927, the levees in Plaquemines Parish were blown. 1965, the levees in the Lower Ninth Ward were blown. The two areas are connected. Don't be surprised if a storm threatens the French Quarter. The levees on the eastern side of the city will be disrupted again.
And Zen, one more thing. If you could get in touch with me also about the shootout between the mercenaries and the police officers that has been buried. Obviously, the story with Ronald Madison and his family, and the other gentleman. Yes, the other gentleman that was shot. That was a true story. No one denies that. But I would like to hear more about the shootout between the mercenaries and the police officers that we've heard that were shot. And if you could please elaborate on it one day if you got back with me, I'd like to have more information on that.
Yeah, I will do that. I'm going to actually see if this is a clip from Captain May about that. But, yeah, we'll do a follow-up at some point.
And we need to, and right fast, we need to get a copy of the congressional report, because George Bush had edited and blacked out some things. And through the Freedom of Information Act, through the Obama administration, some things were made known. I'd like to get a copy if anyone has that. I don't know how long it is, but that congressional report would be very useful.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, let's see if this is that clip. God bless y'all. We'll talk to you soon.
Stay safe now.
This is the actual levee that runs along the canal on the eastern side of the city. And when the hurricane hit, the water came through the canal at such force it was apparently too much. You can see the massive breach here. And when you look around the corner, you can see what the water did to the lower 9th Ward. It completely destroyed neighborhoods.
I heard something go boom!
Joe Edwards rushed to get himself and as many neighbors as possible into his truck. They drove to this bridge where they've been living ever since.
My house broke in half. My mother's house just disintegrated. It was a brick house. All the houses down there floated down the street like somebody's guide.
Was it solely the water that broke the levee? Or was it the force of this barge that now sits where homes once did? Joe Edwards says neither. People are so bitter, so disenfranchised in this neighborhood, they actually think the city did it, blowing up the levee to save richer neighborhoods like the French Quarter.
So you're convinced? I know it happened.
That they broke the levee on purpose?
They blew it.
Says apparently there was a news report of 6 Army Corps of Engineers that were shot to death at the time of the levee breaches in New Orleans.
Is it possible that they were the ones that actually blew them up?
Thank you very much. You know, I can't tell you enough how grateful I am for these questions. I wish we could do another 2 hours. This is the most gratifying set of questions I've ever had. Remember about 30 minutes ago I said, hey, y'all, the levees, Katrina, they were blown? Yeah, that's exactly the story I got, that there are Army or military special operations or maybe mercenary forces there, or maybe CIA forces. There were forces of dark intent there to destroy the levees. What I was getting at the time was that there was actually a firefight, you may have heard this story, between New Orleans cops and elements that were trying to blow the levees, where there were actually battles in New Orleans going on between the cops and the forces that were there to destroy the city. If you look back in time, you'll also remember that you were hearing things about how the police had lost radio communication and how they couldn't get supplies in.
Right.
Folks, all I can say is if you go to my site, you'll find that we did an analysis of Katrina as it was going on. We called it BONO, Battle of New Orleans, because the way we read it, that whole thing was an extermination job. I know it sounds real cruel to think that. Daniel, you asked me earlier, how can these people rationalize the murder of 3,000, 30,000 people? My answer is, well, they did 3,000 in September 2001. They did 10,000 in August 2005.
Yeah.
That was an extermination job, man. When people say, well, yeah, the system really screwed up, no, it didn't. The system intended to exterminate New Orleans. It was the poorest, most minority-controlled city in the Gulf Coast. The elimination of the people who lived there made the state of New Orleans go from being a blue Democratic state to a red Republican state, and it opened up the offshore facilities of the Gulf of Mexico south of New Orleans to further petroleum exploration. In other words, it was a murder, a mass murder.